You Francy, huh? Oh, you Francy, huh? Oh, you Francy, huh? Oh, you Francy, huh? On May 5th, 1789, King Louis XVI called together the Estates General because his treasury was depleted due to the cost of fighting recent wars. This body, which had not met since 1614, was made up of representatives from the three estates. The first estate was made up of the clergy. The second estate was made up of the nobility. And the third estate was the common people. Members of the third estate had virtually no power in the government but paid almost all the taxes. On June 17, 1789, the representatives of the Third Estate broke away from the Estates General and formed a new group called the National Assembly. They swore to meet separately until France became a constitutional government. Some members of the First and Second Estates joined them. In need of a unified group to have new taxes passed, Louis gave in to the Assembly's demands. He then urged the rest of the nobles and clergy to join the Assembly. Before the National Assembly, the Church was exempt from paying taxes to the government. However, it levied a tithe, a 10% tax on income, often collected in the form of crops. The power and wealth of the Church was highly resented by some groups. For example, a small minority of Protestants living in France, such as the Huguenots.
Alright, now Amy, do something religious
Also,
like.
the National Assembly began to enact social and economic reform. During all of this, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen is signed. This is a fundamental document of the French Revolution, defining the individual and collective rights of all the estates of the realm as universal. However, neither women nor slaves. In July 1789, Louis gathered troops near Paris. The people of Paris feared that he was going to seize power from the Assembly and go back to his old methods of absolute power. During that period of time, France was governed by their king, under an absolute monarchy and by divine right, where the right to rule was thought to have come from God. One particular idea that inspired the French Revolution was the suggestion that the right to govern the country came from the people. The result of this idea was the storming of the Bastille to free political prisoners. This date is recognized as the beginning of the French Revolution. Over the next few years, stability in France deteriorated rapidly. On October 5, 1789, crowds of women began to assemble at Parisian markets. The women first marched to the Hotel de Ville, demanding that city officials address their concerns.
No more harsh economic situations!
Oui, oui!
And loyal effort to block the National Assembly!
Oui, oui!
King and his administration must move to Paris as a sign of good faith in addressing the widespread poverty.
What?
Just go with it!
Oui, oui!
Oui!
In 1793, the king and his family were executed. During the next 2 years, tens of thousands of people were executed during the Reign of Terror.
Hey, 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 hey. I'm in the house. I'm in the house. I'm in the house.
In 1799, the most popular of the French generals, Napoleon Bonaparte, declared himself leader of France. During the revolutionary period, monasteries were overtaken and communities of monks and nuns were disbanded. Instead of the Pope appointing bishops, the people voted for their bishops and priests. All members of the clergy had to swear allegiance to the state rather than the Pope. After a decade-long series of military conquests and virtual leadership of France, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself emperor. Before Napoleon gained power, French armies had invaded Italy and deported the Pope to France. The College of Cardinals was disbanded, and many people thought that the papacy had come to an end. However, when Napoleon came to power, he realized that
Napoleon therefore signed a concordant with the new Pope Pius VII in 1801.
this concordant ended the de-Christianization period and established the rules for a relationship between the Catholic Church and the French state that lasted until it was abrogated by the Third Republic via the separation of the Church and state on December 11, 1905. The persecution of the Church led to a counter-revolution known as the Revolt in the Vendée.
I'm going in, I'm going in, I'm going in, I'm going in.
And I'ma go hard, and I'ma go hard, and I'ma go hard, and I'ma go hard.
This acceptance of the Pope's authority signaled a move away from Gallicanism to Ultramontanism. This meant that the control of the French Church was in the hands of the Pope, who resided beyond the mountains rather than in France. After Napoleon, popes found it necessary and beneficial to make concordats with many of the European countries ruled by Catholic monarchs. These concordats aimed at a balance of power between pope and ruler. As the 19th century progressed and democratically elected leaders governed European nations, concordats were either dismissed or ignored. By the time of Pius IX, who was pope from 1846 to 1878, the pope had little political power, but there is no question that the pope was the supreme and sole head of the Catholic Church.